first of all, I think I decided I would like to dedicate this to my mother, Nancy, who passed away just barely a couple of years ago. It was her initiative that I started this search. She wanted to know what happened to her family. And so a lot of the impetus for my doing genealogy in the first place came from her. And I also want to dedicate this to her mother, Edith, and my great-grandmother, Dora, whose journey I will be describing. And all three were remarkable women, strong, and dealt with really difficult times, difficult situations with a lot of grace. So I dedicate this to them. So as the title implies, this is about the overland journey, the part from at the point our ancestors decided to leave until they got to a steamship port and it came to presumably to America. My starting point was my research into my own family's history. And I've been working on this for, in fits and starts, more than 30 years. However, in most cases, I started too late to be able to ask those who went through those experiences firsthand. Instead, I've had to rely on secondhand accounts, on documents and photos passed down to me through the family and through public records. But that still leaves a lot of gaps, which I've tried to fill through research into the circumstances of the times. And those two stories, the research about my family and then what I've learned more generally about the journey everyone made, is what I'm going to share with all of you. By way of a disclaimer, I want to say that the Jewish exodus from Eastern Europe is a huge and complicated topic, and it does not fit neatly into a simple 1-hour slideshow. It's a mosaic of millions of unique stories. And while I may not tell exactly the story of your family's journey, I hope you learned something interesting and useful from the story I will tell. As I said, I recommend you just sit back, take in the big picture, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end. So let's see. A couple things in background. I'm working with the era from 1880 to 1914. This was the height of the Jewish immigration out of Eastern Europe. Before 1880, there was fairly small movement, and after 1914, it virtually stopped. So if you're an Ashkenazi Jew in America, there's an odds-on chance your family came during this period. And for Eastern Europe, we're talking mostly about the Russian Pale Lee settlement, which includes what is now Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and a good chunk of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. And as you can see from these numbers, we estimate 2.5 billion Jews. Some use smaller numbers. Some researchers think there's about half of the Jews in Russia left during this period. And as you can see, vast majority that came to the United States. Smaller amounts from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, including Galicia, Bukovina, Hungary, and from Romania. Here is a map. This is from the FamilySearch.org. It's one of the organizations I recommend, that shows the density of Jewish population. We got somebody who's not, okay. This is, let's see, the vast majority of Jews in the world lived in Eastern Europe in 1880. And you can see the darkest gray areas represents the places where the population was more than 15% Jewish. The black dots are cities in which the Jewish population was more than 50%. So you get a pretty good sense of the density where the Jews lived in this time period up until 1880. Let's see. And a little bit more context, a brief kind of sketch of the time period. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what was going on in Russia that drove our family out, our families out, but I think most of us are aware it was not a good place for Jews. Um, some of the key events, the assassination of Alexander II and the ascension of his son Alexander III. Um, the, the government provoked a number of pogroms, even though the people responsible for Alexander's assassination were nationalist reactionaries who were responding to Alexander II's liberal policies. Um, the government chose to focus the blame on Jews and provoked hundreds of pogroms. So there was a big peak in Jewish exodus from that area as a result. Also, Alexander II put together what were called the May laws. Jews were already restricted fairly closely in the Western Empire, the area called the Pale Lee Settlement. But the May laws further restricted their lives. They had to move, some had to move from certain places to other places because as the movement within the Pale became much more restrictive, certain kinds of jobs and employment, other activities were constrained. The level of oppression really just peaked up in 1882. And then the second big wave comes in the period around 1903, 1905, particularly around the Russo-Japanese War. In order to, you know, fight the war, the Tsar upped the conscription, and Jews were particularly targeted by conscription into the military. And then when Russia surrendered, and they didn't surrender, but they lost the war. And again, the Jews were blamed, and then another huge wave of pogroms swept through. And as you can see, 1907 was the peak of the immigration of Russian Jews out of emigration from Russia into the United States. 1914, like I said, pretty much ended immigration, but I'll talk about that more as I go on. So this all starts with my own family and my own research into my family's background. In most cases, they weren't around, but at the point that I started doing this research, there was nobody I could ask directly about their experience. The one exception was my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, Jacob Jaffe, sometime in the 1970s, partly as a graduate school thing, I decided to interview and tape his interview. And I asked him about his life. And I have a little clip here where he talks about his journey out of the Pale. I'm hoping this works.
By boat, sure. Took took 3 weeks. The boat left from Belgium, Antwerp. In other words, we were smuggled over from the Russian into Germany, and from Germany you got a train and they brought you to different places. I came from Antwerp, and when I came to Antwerp, I was supposed to arrive in Antwerp on Friday, and the ship was supposed to leave on Saturday. But we arrived on Saturday night. Something happened to the train. We were delayed. We weren't mistreated or anything like that. And we had to wait for next Saturday for the next boat to leave.
So in spite of having direct information about his story, I have never managed to find any records about his journey. I have found his mother and 2 brothers, his father's arrival, all kinds of documents about other members of the family. I can kind of place, based upon his story and what I know about his family, that he probably arrived sometime around 1898, 99. But like I said, I've never found any records that confirm when he arrived, how he arrived, anything like that. On the other hand, here are my great-grandmother Dora Koshkin Jaroff and my grandmother Edith Jaroff Schwartz. And I date this picture somewhere around 1912, maybe 1915, something like that. Um, and they emigrated in 1905, and I, my grandmother, Dora passed away long before I was born. Edith was helped raise me until I was about 6 or 7. But and then passed away when I was 12, and I never asked her anything about her life, about her past life or anything like that. I got interested in this too late to ask her, and yet I've been remarkably successful in trying to track things down about her. Um, for one thing, my mom remembered her mother saying that she was born in snuff, and she just said it sounded like snuff. And through a series of trial and error, worked out that it was a town called Snozk in Ukraine. It's in an area called Chernigov, which is close to the Belarus border. And that little piece of information, just knowing that name, really provided the opportunity to weigh into finding much more. So here is a picture of the Koshkin and Jaroff family. I date this for 1908 because this fellow, my mom's uncle Henry, we called him Dan, was born in August 1907 in Brooklyn. So I know this was taken in the United States and around what date. And let me introduce you. There's my grandmother Edith, you saw in the earlier picture, and there's her mother Dora. That's my grandmother's brother Abram, and their father Jacob, another Jacob, and Jacob Jaroff. And then so their history here. Jacob was the first to arrive. He came in I think it's June 1904. I think if we look at my notes better. Let's see. Oh, sorry, that jumped. Sorry. He came in 1904. He brought Dora, Abram, and Edith over in January 1905. Next came Dora's brothers, Harry and Alexander. This is Alexander's wife, Becky, and their daughter, Anna. They married, and Anna was born in the United States. And then Dora's parents, Hyla and Lieb, so my great-great-grandparents, came over in September 1906, again paid for by Jacob. The manifest says that he bought their tickets. And the last to arrive was Dora's sister Rose, and that's her husband Sam. So let's see, there we go. This is the passenger record for the Vaterland in departing Antwerp the 14th of January 1905, arrived New York City the 25th of January 1905. And here is Dora, Abraham, and Edith, called Ida. I'll just point out that originally somehow the clerk wrote down Barrow. The Jaroff name originally was transliterated Zarov, and some reason the original clerk wrote down Barrow, and all of the sites that index these have her down as Barrow. So it took a long time to find her. The reason I did manage to associate her with my family is down at the other end of the line. It says that the fare was paid by her husband, and Abraham and Ida's father. She had $5 in her pocket when she arrived. Just think about that. And it says that she was joining her husband, J. Jaroff, and then in parentheses, Zaroff. And some clerk apparently made the correction to Z on there. but that never made it into the indexing system, so it was hard to find. I will point out that on the same traveling record, and the reason I did find it was right below Dora, Abram, and Ida is Fega Zaro, and who I believe was Dora's sister-in-law and her two children. And also on the same page was Dora's first cousin. Recorded here is Sonia Koshkin, and that's one of Sonia's granddaughter is actually on this call. So this other Jora family doesn't talk to me, so I don't know why. Anyway, families, what can you do? So they were sailing from Antwerp, arrived in New York. The next piece that I found is in a pile of documents that came to me through the family. There was a pamphlet written in Cyrillic handwriting. I eventually figured out that it was a passport, and then after a series of translations, help from different translators, was able to make out that this was actually a governor's overseas passport and it's made out to Disia Lebova Zorov. And after further research, discovered that Disia was a nickname, a Slavic nickname for Devora, which is Dora's name. And so I know that was her. It says that she's a wife of a Mogilev Meshkenin, sorry, I don't do this far, which means a petty bourgeoisie, basically anyone, probably a store owner or something like that. And it includes her children, Abram and Ida. And as you know, it was issued in Mogilev because I believe that Jacob was a registered citizen of Mogilev. My great-grandfather was a registered citizen of Mogilev, so she had to go to Mogilev to get her passport. Then another translator going deeper into this found on a later page in the passport, this is the exit stamp. This is where she left Russia. Just ironically, if you want to know, this portion here was left for when she returned. Didn't get used much. Most Jews who left did not go back. Big surprise. Anyway, she went out through a border crossing called Versbolov. It's at the time that was on the border between Prussia and the Russian Empire. It's now a town called Verbane in Lithuania, and it's on the Lithuanian-Polish border. But at the time, this was the frontier between Russia and Prussia, the German Germany. So suddenly I had an itinerary, and she was in Mogilev on 17th of December, 1904. My grandmother was born in Snovsk. I think the family all reported on the passenger record that her last residence was Snovsk. And we know she was across the border, Versbolov, 10 days after she got the passport. This is a 1905 Russian rail map. It goes into great detail. It's a great resource. And you can see there's a more or less direct route through Vilna to Versbolov. And I think the estimates are it would take about a day, 2 days maybe at the most if you had to change trains in Vilna to get there. So my guess is that she got the passport, returned to Snovsk, picked up the kids, picked up other other travelers that were going with her. Whatever she was going to be carrying with her, said goodbye to her family, and got on the train and headed to the frontier. Then we also know that she was on the Vaterland when it left Antwerp on the 14th of January. This is a Google map, a modern map. now you can see that the Verzbala where she left was now on the border with Poland, and there's Lithuania. But at the time, this was Russia and this was Prussia. There are modern railroads. They probably follow pretty much the same. This is about 1,000 miles. And I had to wonder why she went so far. This is looks like almost the longest land journey you could take to get out of Europe. Um, Especially since two of the biggest ports with most ships, fastest ships, were sailing out of Bremen and Hamburg, which was much closer. This was kind of the question that drove a lot of this research: is why Antwerp? What was it about the sailing from Antwerp that made her choose that? Even further, even closer, there was a port within the Russian Empire at Libau. This is now part of Latvia, and it's called Lipaja. But at the time, this was one of the more popular ports. If you had a passport, you could stay within sorry, getting ahead of myself, stay within the Russian Empire and get to this port without having to cross a border. And the ships sailing from here did not go all the way to the United States. You would go to England, change ships, and then sail from England on. Some people, I think, were concerned about, getting stranded in England or what the process of changing ships. You also had to pass through all of this, as opposed to going right out into the North Sea. So that might have been a factor. I don't know. Here's another view of the route. Snovsk, and there's Libau. It could have been probably a 2-day train trip to get there instead of all the way across Europe to Antwerp. So this is where the paper trail runs out for me. I know where they were, when they were there, but I don't know why, and I don't know how. And so this is why I turned to doing research on the wider conditions of the time, things that everybody's families would be confronting, and the decisions they would be making. Let's see. So I looked into a lot of things. There are not that many personal accounts that have been recorded. One of the keys is this one, From Plotzk to Boston by Mary Anton. Her family emigrated in 1894. A few years later, she wrote this book, which was published. There's a link in the handout to an online version of this. It's a marvelous little story. It's not very long, and it's worth reading. Government reports, the United States particularly was really concerned about the number of immigrants coming. They wanted to know why they were coming. They wanted to make sure that they were legitimate, that they weren't bringing disease, or they weren't, coming for illicit purposes. And they did a number of investigations. They sent agents to Europe to see what was going on, and I've listed a few of those. There were a number of big congressional commissions, multi-volume reports about what was going on in Europe at the time, the conditions that were driving people out, the systems that were bringing people to the United States. There was a growing anti-immigrant movement within the United States that wanted to see this end, and a lot of these studies were bent towards bolstering those campaigns. There's some scholarly papers, a lot of scholarly papers. It's become more and more of an interest. And then there's lots of little documents, everything from train schedules to the rate books for the railroads and the steamship lines. You can kind of put together a little picture from a lot of different sources. And I've been doing this for about a year now, digging into all of these things, reading as much as I can. And so, like I said, links to most of the main items are in the handout when you get it. Now at this point, what I'm trying to do is in this presentation, kind of give you a sense of what I've learned in this process. So here are the Koshkins again. I want to kind of talk about what they were up against. People who made this journey had to leave their home and family. Sometimes they didn't know they were going to see people again. Even if the others were going to join them, they couldn't be sure that the others would be managed to follow. They had to get across Russia or Austria or whatever country they were in. They had to cross a national border. They had to get into another country, either legally or illegally. Then they had to go across Europe. And this is usually a difficult um, train trip. When they got to the port, it was a 10 to 14-day journey, which I say endure. Then they had to get through U.S. immigration and then make a home in their new country. You have to remember, these are people, in a lot of cases, lived in shtetls, small villages, towns. Some of them had never been out of their own town before. They spoke Yiddish. Maybe they spoke a little bit of Ukrainian or Russian or Polish or German, but their first language was Polish. They were going to have to negotiate with officials, read signs, instructions, sign documents, get through all kinds of hurdles on the way. Most of them had never seen or ridden on a train, and certainly none of them had seen the ocean or been on an ocean liner before. So just kind of the fact that they made it is just remarkable to me. I mean, I think that we all owe them so much for what they went through. So this picture is the after picture. This is people who have made it. This is their celebration of their arrival and their reunion. I want to, let's see, got the names back in here. I want you to pay particular attention before I show you the next slide to Alexander, Harry, Rose, Hyla, and Lieb, because this is the before picture. There's Hyla, Lieb, Alexander, Harry, and Rose. The two in the center are my great-great-great-grandparents, Mordecai and Molka Rappaport, Hyla's parents. And one of the remarkable things about this is I think Harry is holding his steamship ticket here. So I think that Dora had already sailed. I mentioned earlier that Alexander and Harry were the next to follow after Dora. And since they came in March, these two came, pointing with my hand, because these two came in March 1906. I think this is early 1906, and I think this is the farewell picture. And in addition to all of these other steps, these hurdles they went through, the first one, and in a way, the primary one, was to get the steamship ticket, because that was the first step, the one that shaped the rest of the journey. So a little bit about the steamships. I'm not going to talk about the voyage so much, but about the ports. Each port was dedicated to a particular steamship company. Each steamship company sailed from a particular port. So if you had a ticket on a ship from the North German Lloyd line here, you were going to when you left Russia, you were going to be heading to Bremen. So the question for me is, did Dora go to Antwerp because she wanted to sail on a ship on the Red Star line, or did she sail with Red Star because she preferred to sail from Antwerp? The choice of steamship line could also depend on their destination, especially if you're going anywhere other than New York. For instance, people did sail other places in the United States, Canada, South America, even Australia, South Africa, and of course, Palestine. And certain steamship companies serve certain routes, and you picked the steamship line if that was your concern, and then that set the port you went to. There are dozens of permutations that could shape these choices: cost, safety, comfort. The steerage business was very lucrative. This made these companies millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in 1905 money we're talking about. Some of the people involved in this became millionaires on this business. As a matter of fact, the steerage business is what paid for first class. And I mean, they could put 2,500 people in steerage and 100 people in first class, and they were making money on the steerage people. The different lines offered incentives in order to attract the business, everything from lower prices to newer, bigger, faster ships, and even better land accommodations. And some of them were providing kosher meals, both along the way at the ports and on the ships. They had rabbis on board. They had to certify the kosher kitchen, things like that. They also engaged in cutthroat tactics to gain advantage over the competition. So, for instance, Hamburg America and North German Lloyd ran the immigration stations between Prussia and Russia, and they could reject people if they weren't holding tickets on one of those two lines. And there was a quota for some of the other steamship lines. And sometimes what they do is cajole people into changing their tickets to sail on one of the German lines as opposed to the other. So it was during that period, this was a big deal. You'll see Laval was one of the bigger ports. It didn't start serving the United States until about 1906. Hamburg, Bremen, Antwerp together really do account, and Rotterdam, I throw in Rotterdam. Those four ports along the North Sea pretty much accounted for most of the transit across. The choice of the tickets sometimes was not up to the passenger. Most of the tickets were bought or called prepaid. And that meant that somebody who had already gotten to the United States would go to an agency and then pay for the ticket on installments. And there were actually what they called immigrant banks. Several of the ledgers of several of these immigrant banks in Philadelphia are now in the archives at Temple University Library. And your index is where you can find your way into these. If your family sailed to Philadelphia, there's a good chance that you might be able to find their record in here. So this is the register for the Rosenbaum Immigrant Bank. And this happens to be the page for part of my family. Actually, Hyla's sister. This is Hyla's sister, Sippy Gordon, and three of her children. I don't know who this is that was paying for this. Somebody by the name of Slokoff. I have to still research that name. This is something I've only discovered in the last week or so. But you can see this is the entry on this side. It says she was booked from Laval they were booked from Laval to Philadelphia on the American line, which is the one that served Laval. The ticket number, and this is the accounting for the cost. Each individual, there's 5 people on this accounting. The total price was $136 for 5 people to sail. It said they had paid $30. There was a balance of $106 left, due in 30 days. And it says ticket to purchaser. There's going to be on the SS Haverford, sailing in October 1912. And remarkably, here is a detail from the SS Haverford's passenger list. There's Sippy, there's Esther, Leah, and Fruma. The others might have had their tickets purchased on another account, but they arrived October 1912. It's just amazing to me that such consequential transactions cross an ocean before computers, before phones, before any of the modern capability could actually take place and over these distances. It worked. On the other hand, getting out of Russia was not quite that easy. This is a often quoted line from a advisor to Alexander III and Nicholas II, that the plan, the Russian government's plan was 1/3 would die out, 1/3 would emigrate, and 1/3 would assimilate to the local population without a trace. Russia's ultimate plan for Jews was no more Jews, one way or the other. But strangely enough, they didn't make emigration very easy. Getting a passport like this was onerous. It was costly. There was a lot of red tape. Um, you needed to get documents from all kinds of different sources to bring, and then there's even an obligation if anyone in your family was due for military service, that could keep you from getting a passport. Um, and I think it's remarkable that my great grandmother got one, and equally, even more remarkable that it survived, and to the point that I have it. These are two comments from people who visited the border around this time. Jacob Lashinsky was a journalist, historian. Um, he was visiting one of the ports my family came through, and said 90, and his numbers are usually used as 90 out of 100 could not obtain passports. And he said, why didn't this wretched woman get a passport? It was impossible. 3 of her sons had left Russia, said Russian, and she had to pay a penalty of 900 rubles. Here's a young maid of 17 who had a bunch of troubles. Why didn't she get a passport? It was impossible. She is an orphan and has no papers. So the consequences, most of these people then had to smuggle themselves across the border. You heard my grandfather, Jacob, in the beginning saying he was smuggled across the border. There were all kinds of arrangements for doing that. There were professional smugglers. Some people took it upon themselves. It was risky. It was not cheap. Smugglers were not doing this for altruism. It was a profit center for some people. And it was often dangerous. Smugglers often, there were all kinds of stories about people being waylaid. You get them to an open field and you say, you owe me an extra 100 rubles, or in some cases, violence against them to rob them. And sometimes bodies were found. This is Philip Cowan. He was an American immigration inspector who went into Russia in 1906. I'll talk more about him later. So having no proper passport or the means to pay the 18 rubles that it cost with fees, the immigrant is compelled to smuggle across the border into Germany, Austria, or Romania, a proceeding that is neither without cost nor risk, as will be detailed later on. You can get this online. Yeah, I very much recommend reading Cowan's report. It's fascinating reading. It's like a little novel. Indeed, it is here that the immigrant is often despoiled of all he possesses. And he recounts different stories about people running into trouble being smuggled. This is the train station, basically the western terminus of the Russian Empire Railroad, where it meets the Prussian border, Verzbolav. The German name was Werballen. This is again the exit stamp from my great grandmother's passport. That's where it says Verzbolav. There it is in Russian, in Cyrillic. And like I said, it's now called Verbalis. The passport was to get out of Russia. It was not to get into Germany. The Germans didn't care if you had a passport. So whether or not you got across legally or were smuggled, the next step was to I lost something. When you got across the border, the Germans were concerned that you weren't carrying a disease that would start an epidemic or cause other problems, and that you had the means to continue on and complete your journey and leave again. So there had been a cholera epidemic that hit Hamburg in 1892, and it was falsely blamed upon Eastern European immigrants. And Germany shut down all passage across this border, and no immigrants were allowed in again until the steamship companies, fearing they were going to lose money, stepped in and set up a bunch of border stations for inspection to make sure people were clear, and set up a system of special trains to carry passengers across Germany, isolated from the general population, and isolated them as much as possible when they got to their ports. Those of you whose family took a more southerly route, went through Austria or Romania to get out of Russia, they also probably came up into Germany to get to the places like Bremen and Hamburg, or even Rotterdam and Antwerp. And so they would have eventually hit one of these German border stations and gone through the same experience. So this is the station on the Russian Empire side. On the other side was Ed. The German defeats me. It's Ed Kuhnen. It's now actually part of Poland, and it has a completely different name. Right here is Verzbolow, and it says in the parentheses Werballen. And then here's Ed Kuhnen. So this is a detail from that same railroad map. So you basically took the train to Verzbolow and then switched trains at the station for Ed Kuhnen, and then there was the inspection station. And this is a little extract from Mary Anton's memoir about the inspection at Ed Kuhnen. They went through Verzbolow. The doctor asked many questions about our health and what our nationalities were. Then he asked about various things, as where we were going to, if we had tickets, how much money we had, where we came from, whom we were going, to whom we were going, etc., etc., making a note of every answer he received. This done, he shook his head with his shiny helmet on it and said slowly, I imagine he enjoyed frightening us, with these third-class tickets, you cannot go to America now because it is forbidden to admit passengers into Germany who have not at least second-class tickets. You will have to return to Russia. At any point along this journey, if you got rejected, it was back to square one. And for most people, there was no going back. If they'd been smuggled across, they were now illegal in their own country. So there was no going back. So this was a tragedy of unimaginable size. In this case, Anton's family managed to find a local person in a nearby town, a Jew, who paid for them to upgrade their tickets. And they're talking about actually their train tickets. Their steamship tickets were fine. They were going to Hamburg, so they were within the German system. But the authorities could change. It's one of the things that makes all the journeys different. Somebody going 1 week and going the next, even people crossing the border at the same time might have very different stories. They might hit an official who suddenly drops the hammer on them in some way. So everyone had a different experience. This would be the first of many inspections they would go through on their way to the United States. The other one, and this was quite important, was Reuvelin. This was a purpose-built station for immigrant control. They were called transmigrants passing through. Very little bit known. This fellow, Tobias Brinkman, has done a lot to expose what was going on there. All the trains, this was just outside of Berlin, all the trains coming from the border would go to Berlin. People would be unloaded here, go through an inspection, disinfection, and then put on another train that would send them to where their eventual port was. So even people coming up, say, from the southern, so through Austria or whatever, if they were going, if your ancestors went through Germany or on the way to a steamship port after 1891, they probably went through Rugolin. I want to make a special note of his comment, an American system of remote control, because this is an issue that keeps cropping up, and there'll be more a little bit later. A lot of these rules, a lot of this oversight that the Germans were applying were at the behest of the American immigration. And so a lot of the treatment people experienced was presaging what was going to happen to them when they got to the United States. There's a quote later that it makes this much more explicit. This is Mary Anton's description of Rugolin. I won't read it all, but we're driven into a little room where a great kettle was boiling in a little stove, our clothes taken off, our bodies rubbed with a slippery substance that it might be any bad thing. A shower of warm water let down on us without warning. Again, driven to another little room where we sit wrapped in woolly blankets until large coarse bags are brought in, their contents turned out, and we see only a cloud of steam. Their possessions had been taken from them and put through a disinfection process involving a steamer, and their belongings are given back to them. I'll skip to the end. Oh, so we won't be murdered. They're only making us ready for the continuing of our journey, cleaning us of all suspicions of dangerous germs. Thank God. You can see why I recommend this. You read this. The next step was arrival at a steamship port. This is a picture of a barracks at, I believe this is probably Hamburg. It's hard, I couldn't blow this up to make it more legible, but this sign up here, the last line is in Yiddish. So there really were, they knew that they were moving Jews and they were prepared. As a matter of fact, they prepared in the Hamburg accommodations at the port, they provided kosher meals. You can read Anton's first impressions. Here was a pleasant prospect. I mean, she's being ironic. We had no idea how long this unattractive place might be our home. On the other hand, she describes a Passover Seder held while they were in this location. It describes how people were like really concerned that Passover was coming. And here they were in this kind of captive situation. And then they come to dinner the next night, and the tables are set with white tablecloths, and there are silk pillows on their table, on their chairs. And one of the young yeshiva students among the passengers leads them in a Passover Seder. So there were accommodations, there were nice moments in this experience. Other ports did not necessarily have such things. The Hamburg America line was particularly active in doing things like this and setting up large compounds. Here's a picture of the one in Hamburg. They called it Auswanderer, foreign wanderer. At around 1891, an American delegation, a commission called the Foster Commission, visited Europe and met with the Hamburg authorities and were cajoling them to up the rigorousness of inspecting American-bound passengers, and telling them it was within their power that insane, idiots, persons afflicted with dangerous, contagious, and loathsome diseases, persons likely to become a charge upon the public by reason of old age, pregnancy, cripples, and other apparent physical defects could be as readily detected at the port of embarkation or at their official starting point, meaning back at the border, so that when they got to the United States, they were already screened heavily. There would be a medical inspection when they arrived at these locations. And then there could be serial medical inspections while they were waiting, especially if they left the compound. They weren't prisoners in these places, but anytime they left the compound, they would be subject to another medical check. Here are some inspection cards. This was when they boarded. There's a number of descriptions of the boarding process that basically line up at the gangplank, and there would be three doctors and an American consular official. So the American immigration was being checked, and each person, as they were being inspected, was handed one of these cards and told to keep it. And you can see there is an American consular stamp on all of these. This one was done in Genoa in 1915, and actually it also includes a vaccination certificate. And just for kicks, I added this one. It's the Titanic. It's only one trip. So, but you can see they all have American consulars. So the United States' hand was very, very much in this, even before they got to Ellis Island or to one of the other ports. I know I'm running over. So just a few more things. I just wanted to give a shout out to these two men. Albert Balin ran the Hamburg American line. He was the director of the line. He was born to a poor Jewish family in Hamburg, worked his way up to become the director of this. He built the Hamburg line into the biggest, fastest, fanciest line in the Atlantic. And he's the one that set up all of the transit from the border to the ports. And innovative, brilliant, and without him, a lot of this the volumes of people that came could not have come. Jacob Schiff was an American, German, Jewish financier, very involved in the Jewish community in New York. He was based in New York. He was a fervent lobbyist on behalf of open immigration. He was very concerned about the conditions of Russian Jews, wanting to see as many of them get out as possible. And he did battle with like a lot of, there was a rising anti-immigration thread in the United States, very much like what we're seeing now, language like, mongrelization, replacement theory, that kind of thing. And he had the ear of presidents and congressmen, and he did a lot of work to keep the doors open. I think we owe the fact that any of us are here, if we're descendants of those people who came, these two plus a few others I can name were really critical in the fact that the doors, that there was a means to get here, and that the door was open when we did get here. We'll say that the system for moving the masses of immigrants and that these two helped build and sustain came crashing down in 1914. World War I just basically ended it all. With Russia, Britain, and eventually the US at war with Germany and Austria, the borders closed, and the Atlantic and Baltic became war zones. Commercial ships were commandeered for the war. Some were sunk, some never got built. At the end of the war, the borders remained hardened, and the systems supporting immigration were gone. Then the chaos that followed the Russian Revolution and then the Civil War that followed made escape from the region even more difficult and dangerous. Finally, in 1924, anti-immigration campaign in the US succeeded in passing the Reed-Johnson Act, which imposed a quota system and reduced the flow of Jews to a trickle. I say the descendants of the Jews escaped from Eastern Europe during the 30-some years of, I was originally talking about earlier, the turn of the century. We owe these two men, an enormous debt of gratitude, seeing what happened. Those who didn't get out by then would find it much harder to leave, and we know with dire consequences. I will say it's kind of appropriate we're doing this on Passover, okay? Exodus, right? I'll just end with an up note. This was another immigration inspector, Terrence Powderly. He was no friend of immigration. He was sent to find problems. He went trying to support the anti-immigration side of things, to find problems, to report that there were illegal or nefarious reasons behind it. And he did question everything. And again, his report's online. It's linked from the handout. But I love this quote from him, this man who really was against immigration, the man who sells his all, parts with everything at home, and faces the trials and hardships of a long journey by rail and another by sea, is made of the stuff that this country should not carelessly reject. Amen and amen. I've got only a couple more slides left. I know I'm a little over time. We got a little bit late start. That's my history. In terms of what you can do to discover your own family, big piece of it is asking family, cousins, aunts and uncles, if they're still around, anything they remember, even the ridiculous stories, and hearing, anything they can tell about what the family's history of the town they came from, anything about towns they passed through, ports they sailed from, the port where they landed. Sometimes you're looking for New York and you find out they landed in Baltimore or Galveston, and then you're looking and you're never going to find anything. So where they landed can be critical. Anyone that was traveling in their party, like I said, Beverly's grandmother was traveling with my great grandmother, and Beverly and I found each other this way. The name of the ship, the date of their arrival, the time periods really do matter about when they came. And just any details, any little anecdotal, anything that anybody in the family remembers. So it's a good time to start talking to family if you can still reach them. So kinds of documents you should be looking for that you can then play back this information you've collected, any family papers and photos. I was really lucky to have the actual physical pamphlet that was my great grandmother's passport. As you saw, only 10% of those people who left had passports, so that's not that likely. And but if there might be somebody sitting on a cache of photos or something, there's something up in the attic, I'll go look for it for you, that kind of thing. Then ship manifests, naturalization papers, U.S. passport applications, the immigrant bank ledgers if you're coming through Philadelphia, and then just anything. Details got seeped into everything. Look at everything. Look for names of people who sign these things. Look for addresses on documents. Census rolls. Sometimes people wrote down a town name where they weren't supposed to. Draft cards. In World War I, World War II, some of the draft cards asked where the person was born, and they would write down the town name on there. Birth, marriage, death, and burial records sometimes contain information about where people were born and that kind of thing. So anything that you can, and just look everywhere. It's a turn over every rock and then we'll turn it over again. I have to say that sometimes I've looked at something, passed on by it, went back and looked at it again and saw something I didn't see the first time. And it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But anyway. Key sources. If you're not already familiar with any of these, I definitely suggest you do. Jewish Gen, Family Search, Steve Morris, and statueofliberty.org. They're all free. You have to register, especially the first two. Jewish Gen is the premier site for anything to do with Jewish history, Jewish genealogy of this sort. Family Search has an enormous amount of records. A lot of the stuff that you would get through paid sources like Ancestry or MyHeritage or some of these other are all free through Family Search. And often Family Search has better versions and better access. So I very much recommend you use that. That's the link to the handout. I will definitely find some way to get that to you. And that's the whole of my journey. Just on a fun note, this is my picture of my grandmother, Edith. She's, I guess, about 18 years old. I don't know who the friend is. It's just what showed up among my mom's papers. It looks like it's dated 1920. And the text up here says, "What if we do live in the Bronx?" and Folly Sisters. And it's actually this photo that set me off in this particular journey, because I went, who is this person? And this little old lady with, the rhinestone glasses that used to bathe me or whatever. And here she is as a flapper. So she's got some kind of markings on the stocking. She's got a mask. They're in some kind of costume or something. And I wanted to find out more about that part of her life. And this is where I started going deep into that particular piece of the past, and, dug up the passport again, and then had it retranslated, and looked into where she lived. I had found out what school she would have gone to when she lived in the Bronx and that kind of thing. So anyway, so it was a fun little thing to end with.